Welcome to this lesson on systems, which is an overview of how systems fit into your law practice and how to create and refine them so that you can use them to create a smooth running, easy to manage, and lucrative practice. So getting into this, I want to begin by talking about perspective and context. So one of the things that I've realized about what's very ineffective in how people with good intentions try to help people, but then don't really help them, and in some cases actually hurt them. And I see this a lot in the legal tech world, which I grew up in, and I admire. Those folks are all my friends. And I refer to the people who see every problem in the practice of law, where they tend to see those problems that relate to technology as the preeminent ones. And they kind of tend to see technology as the magic bullet. They have a hammer, if you will, and every problem seems like a technology problem, or they look to the technology problems first. And the assumption that's built in is that if you solve technology problems, you're solving problems with your practice. And I think that that's unrealistic, number one. And number two, it fails to put things in context. And so I think this is where a lot of information is not given that winds up being useful. So I don't want to do that anymore, and I'm going to kick this new session off with some perspective, so that we can see when we're talking about systems, where does that fit into the bigger picture of managing your law firm efficiently, effectively, and so forth. So we're going to talk about systems, but first we're going to put the topic in context. So a law firm, any law firm, no matter what kind of law firm it is, should be run using well-developed and clearly documented systems. And in general, law firms can be broken down or the operations or the areas of law firms can be broken down in two main areas: operations and marketing. So those are the two big areas. And operations is everything that relates to day-to-day work being done, and it also relates to the management of the firm as a whole. And the management can include billing, finance, accounting, collections, human resources, and things like that. Marketing is about bringing in new clients. And if you do marketing well, if you do it strategically, then you'll be bringing in top-notch clients that happily pay your bills, appreciate your hard work, and also importantly, they enthusiastically refer you to other great people. So good marketing does that, and it also ideally will bring in these top-notch clients in a steady, predictable stream, so that you have confidence that your revenue will be steady and you won't have to suffer through unsettling ups and downs. So where does technology fit into this context? And the short answer is everywhere, because technology affects almost all aspects of your law practice to some extent. And the same is even more true about systems. Basically, systems affect every area of your practice that involves any kind of work that's being done, and whether it's being done well or not, it's being done to some extent in a systematic way. And the little known truth, which it took me a long time to realize and to take stock of, is that basically everything in our world is a system of some kind. Like any change that happens in the world happens because of some systematic process. If a pool ball ricochets in a predictable way, that's because of the laws of physics, which are basically a system that's embedded into the natural world. And perhaps that seems a little lofty and philosophical, but it helps to open your mind about what systems truly are and how omnipresent they are, if you want to truly leverage the power of systems in areas of your life that matter, including the running of your law firm. So if you want more mundane examples of systems that pervade our world, here's an incomplete list. So first is operations manuals. Every franchise company that creates operations manuals does so because they need to have absolute consistency across all the stores, so that all the customers that come into any of those stores know that they'll have the same experience no matter which store they go into, right? And formulas are systems for getting a predictable result. And scientists, for example, use formulas all the time. In fact, the very basis of science is that it's a rigorous system for discerning the truth in a way that overcomes our brain's natural cognitive glitches that routinely lead us to make all kinds of misjudgments, right? And having made the same misjudgment time and time again, we become resistant to looking at a situation in a fresh light unless we use some kind of approach like a system, specifically the scientific method, which is designed to override our harmful mental habits. And then there's checklists, which are a system for reminding us to follow an important series of steps. And the reason we need checklists is because our memories are unreliable, and so is our attention, especially to pesky details. And that's why scientists and that's why pilots, surgeons, and all kinds of other high-performing folks use checklists. And then there's recipes, which are basically checklists too, right? So setting up in a routine way something that you do is also a system. So chefs in every restaurant use a system called mise en place, which is a French phrase, to set up their workspaces so that they can find what they need quickly and easily without making mistakes. So the act of setting things up in a certain way, that's also a system. Another thing that's a system is batch processing. And batch processing is a system for doing similar tasks together. The assembly line that was put in place by Henry Ford was essentially a system for batch processing tasks related to building an automobile. And because of the efficiency of his method, he was able to lower the cost of his cars dramatically and yet still ensure that those cars were built with the highest quality. In fact, the quality was actually better than the old way of building cars one at a time because the old way produced less consistent results. Habits. Every habit is essentially an unconscious system for doing the same task in the same way. When you first start creating a habit, you have to pay conscious attention, which is what makes it hard at first. But once you make it so ingrained that you can do it unconsciously and automatically, it's basically a system. And this aspect of a habit is at the crux of what makes it hard for people to create formal systems and then to document them. Our habit is not to even notice systems. And when we notice them, it's hard for us to create a new habit of defining them and then documenting it. So basically, the main impediment to creating systems and then refining them is good old human nature, right? But finding a way to create systems and then refine them will bring you the same mind-boggling success in your practice that Henry Ford found in his car business. So let's talk about setting up systems. Now, in theory, it shouldn't be hard to set them up, but as I just pointed out, habits get in the way and some other things too. So let's talk about problem solving. And specifically, how do you surmount the problems related to creating effective systems that will make your law practice run smoother and also will allow you to spend less of your time making things happen the way that you want them to? So basically, every manageable problem, in my opinion, has two aspects that need to be considered. And by manageable, I mean it's a foreseeable problem, right? You can't manage the world in a way to avoid having a tornado hit your office because that's not something you can foresee or control. But you can manage the world of people that are close to you, that work with you or for you. So most of the problems in business involve managing humans. And even if you're a solo lawyer and you work with absolutely no one else, you still have to manage yourself. And because you have to deal with your own human nature and the cognitive glitches that you have like everyone else, then it's the same problem even though you're solo. So this is kind of the breakdown for general problem solving. There are two aspects, and that is one, if you're not paying attention to something in the right way or at all, then you can't notice the problem, or you can't notice that the problem needs to be dealt with, or you can't refine the problem. And everything flows from attention. And of course, these days we're all scattered and frazzled because we have too many inputs and we have information overload. We have too much email. Now we get too many text messages. And so your attention is your most precious resource because it allows you to operate and do things in the space of time. And time is a finite resource. So attention and time are closely related. And you're not going to get more time. You can get more attention if you manage your attention better, and you can get more done. So you need to be focused. And when it comes to systems, we'll talk about what that means. But there's focused attention where you're doing this thing now, and there's also attention where, for some projects, mostly the important ones, you need to keep returning with attention to pay attention to it over time. And that's going to be true with systems. You don't just set them up on Tuesday and leave them alone and they keep working. To develop them, you have to pay continuous attention. And then when it comes to the assumptions part of it, you need to be realistic about how things actually work, which means taking stock of human nature and human psychology. And then you also need to be flexible about what it means to have to deal with those situations, because you can hope that things are a certain way, or you can delude yourself into thinking things might be a certain way, or you can just not even pay attention and, just think that they're going to be a certain way. But if they're not, and you have a problem, you have to confront the reality of where that problem is originating from. And, I noticed this first when I was trying to help lawyers in my firm adopt the paperless practice. I assumed that they would understand quickly the benefit of it, which they didn't. And then I assumed that once I showed them, here's the system, it's all set up, that they would just, adapt to it like ducks getting into water. And it turns out that wasn't the case. And it turns out that's true pretty much for all technology. I think especially the techies, the law tech zealots, have this very unrealistic assumption of how human nature impedes the ability of people to adopt technology and use it. But we, the non-law tech zealots, also suffer from this malady because it's basically built into our human nature and our cognitive system. So when it comes to creating, the way you need to manage your attention is, begin with the end in mind. Like, what are we shooting for? And you can start with the super big picture of, if you get everything systematized and documented, you'll be able to turn your law practice over to somebody else and say, here, buy my practice, and you can step away and they'll pay you a lot more money because it's all systematized and they don't need you to hang around explaining to them how to do it. Plus, it'll be running super smoothly. And unless they screw it up, it'll continue to run smoothly. And so people will pay more for a law practice. So that's one end in mind that you could kind of focus on. But the other thing is, just in creating the first system, you're also beginning with the end in mind. You're realizing, at the end, I want somebody to be able to do what exactly? And if you define what that goal is and what they're able to do, that'll help you in terms of defining the rest of the process. So you have to make all this stuff very explicit. But this is, in essence, what all success in business is. It's, defining systems, taking the time to work them out. I mean, Henry Ford didn't walk in one day and say, hey, I got a great idea. I'm going to do the assembly line. Now you guys stand here and you do this. And then he left and it was perfect from then on. Obviously, that did not happen. He had a lot of things to work with, but he had this end in mind. And he probably started with, simple processes at first and kept things simple. And then, as people learned the systems and as he documented them, he then refined them and made them. And if they were more complicated, that was fine. But you're not going to be able to get a complex system right the first time. Just, assume that. So that brings us to assumptions. So assume you're going to have some hiccups. Assume you're going to need to refine the systems, and assume that human nature is going to be a huge factor in your success in documenting them and refining them, and then the success of the people that you assign them to use them effectively. So that, in essence, is an overview of how systems work, and that gives you kind of the basic picture. And I guess we can talk in other lessons about what it means to create them more specifically, but it's important to understand what this looks like in the big perspective to start with. So that wraps up this lesson. I hope that now you have a better appreciation of the real challenges in creating systems for your practice, and you should also have a better understanding of the foundational approach to refining your systems and making sure that they're optimized to the greatest extent possible. Thank you for joining me today, and I will see you in the next lesson soon. All right, so that's the end of the recording for the mini lesson that I'm going to deploy somewhere else. And now we can jump into the general Q&A related to this. We have a question from Dwight. Okay, let me see if I make that go away, whether that allows me to. Okay, what's the question from Dwight? Okay, so that's a good question. Yes, if you're a solo lawyer, then the hardest thing to manage is yourself. That's true. And this is why I think it's really important in terms of self-development and this is true whether you're solo or not, the better you can get at managing your attention, the better you can get at developing the proper mindset so that you can approach things the right way, which part of which involves understanding how your brain tends to steer you off track and things go awry as a result of that. I know many of you have heard me talk about Charlie Munger. Charlie Munger is a great example of, somebody who talks a lot about the kinds of human misjudgment errors, cognitive errors that happen. He's not a psychologist. He's a lawyer first. He started Munger Tolles, which is a very successful firm in LA or Beverly Hills, I believe was where it started. And then he joined Warren Buffett, his lifetime friend from Nebraska, and he became a successful businessman at the highest level. And Munger is somebody who tells you how he is successful. And when Berkshire Hathaway, the company that he and Buffett run, when they acquire a new company, they basically let the company keep doing what it's doing. But to the extent that Munger talks to the folks in the company about stuff, it's about these kinds of things: mindset, look out for these human, these misjudgment errors that we tend to make. My recent email that went out to everyone was about this. There's some books in that I would recommend, you read. Definitely Stumbling Unhappiness is an important book, but the other three are good too, because even though they overlap a lot, the more you come to terms with the reality of how your brain, not through any fault of yours, just the way it's hardwired, is going to tend to steer you awry. And then you can start to look at people who have developed strategies, systems, whatever, to prevail in spite of those problems, right? Like, everybody gets distracted. Well, what can you do about that? Well, meditation is great. I definitely recommend that. So there's a lot of things you can do. That's an important question, but it's one that has, I could go on and on forever about that. So I don't know if that kind of gives you enough to chew on, but those are my thoughts there. Any other questions, Donna?